Welcome, welcome. We want to go on with the second exciting part of our conference, the European Creative Industry Summit. And maybe somebody can help to bring the people in. It's also hard to talk against this wall of sound. So the European Creative Industry Summit is now in second session. Just to recap, so in the morning we had the pleasure to welcome the minister. We had also as a guest the councillor from Prague, and they explained how the ecosystem in the Czech Republic and in Prague is working, how we can work together, what are the needs. Then the second part, the policy forum, as you remember, Mr. Ehler was explaining that the creative industries should be more bold. We shouldn't think small, we should think big. So he came up with the metaphor of not a supertanker, but the aircraft carrier, where, you know, the creative pilots can take off and land, or land and take off. We refuel them, we help them to get on a new stage and take off. He also reminded us that we are not only the solution to the problem, but we're also the cause of the problem with our work. So we have to acknowledge that there is more into the green transition than just providing solutions. Then Johanna explained to us the relation between creative industries and heritage. So this was also for me a learning lesson somehow, how the cultural heritage can relate to the rest of the creative industries and what we can do in the coming future to preserve, to work together, to digitalize, to communicate. Then, of course, our star speaker, Bernd Fesel, explained the backgrounds of the EIT KIC about how the creative and the culture and creative industries will change in the next coming years, because the EIT is investing a lot of money, and Bernd is the CEO of helping to develop these communities, the knowledge and innovation communities. We had Marcel here who explained how the Czech ecosystem is working, how we can create evidence about who is working, what they are working, and what for they are working, and also related to the SDGs, our work. We had, that was the four main speakers. We had a lot of questions answered also. So what we're now facing is the second part, the stakeholder forum. So we had the policy forum, the stakeholder forum, and it's about, we're going to discuss about policies for green economy, CCI greening, up and reskilling, and also we want to address the crisis mode. We are constantly living, and also about the war going on in Ukraine. The first part, we will welcome Caroline Norbury from the UK. She will talk about, of course, the power of creative industries to deal with the global challenges. So this is, again, a reminder about our role in the whole process. We then welcome Kirsten Dunlop, the CC of EIT Climate. So this will be also interesting part, how we can relate to already existing knowledge and innovation network. So they are now working for 10 years about creating this infrastructure and how this relates to us. Then we will have two statements from Maite Ibanez, the country councillor of Valencia, and also the Michael Lansowski, board member of NCAT. So we try to bring also other perspective in. And then around 3 o'clock, we will have 3 tracks coming up. The first track will be about the green CCI, invest and scale up. There we try to bring Bernd on stage and get into a little bit more detail with how we can do it. So he was explaining what they are doing and how we can do it with them. Then we also welcome Masu Assis, the co-founder of Baksa. I hope I pronounced it rightly. So he's from Lebanon, and he will explain about the real crisis mode they're working in there. So with only 2 hours of electricity, how can creatives work there, what they can do, and what strategy he developed. Then we were the second track, the launch of Cyanotype. That's a project for re- and upskilling our sector. So it's, the Cyanotype was commissioned by the EU Commission to run a blueprint project. David Crombie will explain the backgrounds of that and how you can access this knowledge or this network. And then the last part will be about the role of the creative sector helping the Ukraine. And Michael Latke from Kosice will explain what the creatives did there and how amazing work they done there. And of course, then we will have also a short discussion about the points. At 5, this will be then the last part here. We will we will bring researchers on the stage. So young researchers, actually, not boring old farts like me. Really young ones who are really on the edge of what they are doing at universities, and we will give them the stage to present their work and maybe also to discuss with us. And then in the afternoon there will be a party, but I think Peter at the end will then explain where to go and how to go to Creative Prague and have a great networking event. So that's the program. First, I want to welcome Caroline on the stage. Caroline is OBE. Maybe you can explain it exactly what this means. And she's creative. She's chair of ECBN and also the president of Creative England. If I can recall it rightly, founding chief and executive of Creative England. So that's the right terminology. And of course, since she's a founding member of ECBN, and in her work she supports and invests in creative talents, so to say, and businesses in film, TV, and gaming, and also digital media. So, I mean, we can learn a lot from the UK, not to how to exit the European Union, but how to support the creative industries. And maybe you can also relate to that a little bit, how you manage to support the creative industries in that sense. And yeah, her aim is to promote regional talents and to create opportunities for people and companies, even, you know, not only in London, but also outside of London. So also London is a huge hub, but there are a lot of creative talents not only living in London. So her quote would be what I took: social transformation in the context of climate change and what role culture and creative industries can play. So we would like to welcome you and give you the stage.
Thank you, Garen. Hello. Hello, everybody. I always feel the need to apologise as a Brit when you speak to a European audience. So thank you so much, Garen. I'm actually, the company I run is actually called Creative UK now. So it's fine. So we were only England, but just to give you a bit of a background about it. So, so I run Creative UK. We have offices in lots of different parts of the UK. We do 3 things really. We are a membership organisation, so we have members, everybody from sort of big platforms like Facebook and TikTok. We have the BBC, Channel 4, Penguin, Hachette, you know, games companies, lots of big cultural organisations such as the V&A or the Tate Gallery as members. And then we have a whole range of smaller cultural organisations, but also sort of private creative businesses across the whole range of creative industries, everything from fashion and crafts through to games, film, television, etc. So we're a very, you know, we're a broad church, but we also have lots of specialisms within those different verticals. And so we're a membership organisation, and we do 3 big things really. So the first is we do a lot of policy development, research, and campaigning on the things that really matter to the creative industries within the UK, and establish a dialogue with government about policy development. The second thing that we do is we invest directly in creative businesses. So we generally invest somewhere between, I don't know, sort of £4 to £7 million a year. We have a venture debt fund, which started off as a, initially through a sort of a public program, publicly funded program we were running, but actually has now transitioned to become a private sector-led investment fund. And then finally, we run a whole series of business support and development programs for creative entrepreneurs and people running creative businesses. Some of those involve partnerships with global players like Netflix. So we have a feature film program for new talent with Netflix and with Sky. But equally, they could be very, very small, locally delivered, early stage development programs for creative businesses. So that just gives you a bit of an overview about who we are and what we do. And as Garin mentioned, myself and Bernd and my colleague Mahesh Rabin, who's not with us today, and another guy called Leo, who's also not here with us today, we set up ECBN one night in a pub somewhere. I can't even remember where it was. I think it was in Brussels. And it's amazing to see all these years later that it's still going. We've transitioned into the next thing. And I think really huge congratulations, particularly to Bernd, for getting the kick away and really sort of finding the treasure at the end of the rainbow, which is this huge investment pot and this real opportunity for innovation in the creative industries. It just shows that, you know, hard work and perseverance and time, if you're mission orientated, will pay off. I have written a speech, but before I get there, I just wanted to, because after lunch, you know, everybody's feeling a bit sort of like, you know, a bit sluggish, whatever. I just wanted to have a sort of a show of hands, just to sort of get some sort of understanding around, I suppose, some of the things that we share. So I'm going to ask a sort of difficult question, first of all, which is, for those of you who are in who are paid up members of political parties, can you put your hands up? Oh, there's one, and even he's not putting his hand all the way up. I'm not going to look in his direction. So, okay, all right. But how many of you then have watched David Attenborough, BBC's Blue Planet? And how many of you have watched Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth? And how many of you know Joni Mitchell's Big Yellow Taxi? And what about Marvin Gaye's Mercy, Mercy Me? What about Childish Gambino's Feels Like Summer? Ooh, that's good. Okay, so you can see, or Seaspiracy. Who's seen Seaspiracy? Okay, so obviously watching films and listening to music is going to be much more active, isn't it, than at the moment than being a member of a political party in order to really, really engage on the issues that we all care about, such as the climate emergency, racial justice, war, etc. So I just thought that was just I think it's quite useful for us to think about all these things that perhaps we think are peripheral, but actually they themselves are massive agents of change. So I'm really pleased to be here in Prague and in the Czech Republic, a country that over the last 30 years has really successfully navigated change in a very peaceful and dignified matter. And I suppose, you know, after all, you know, you elected a poet as your president. Shouldn't more of us be thinking about that? I'm going to talk today about how we respond to change and how we build resilience in my address this afternoon. And I'm going to set out a few thoughts on why I think artists and poets, designers and creative practitioners might just hold the keys to unlocking many of the solutions to some of the very challenging conditions that we find ourselves in currently. So let's just start with the data and what it tells us about the creative sector. So the last report by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development into the creative industry showed us that the global GVA they generated had doubled in 10 years to just over $500 billion. And in the UK alone, creative industries generate about $164 billion for the economy and employ over 2 million. The GVA has grown fivefold in a decade, and it's worth more than the aerospace and automotive industries combined. And prior to the pandemic, in London, 1 in 8 jobs was in the creative industries. Similarly, in Germany, I think it's about 1.8 million are also employed in the creative sector, and they generate a similar sort of GVA of about, again, of over $100 billion. And whilst the numbers in terms of both GVA and employment might be smaller in other European countries, this sort of trend of sector growth is undoubtedly the same. It's one of an ever-increasing job market with the cultural and creative industries growing quicker than many other sectors and generally faster than Europe's economy as a whole. But with so much uncertainty in the world, and particularly within Europe, it's easy to put the role of the creative industries into the bracket of nice to have. I know that's not what we all think. However, I would say that, you know, most of the publics that we serve probably do think about it being in the nice to have, given the sort of geopolitical and global challenges we face. Things like war on our continent, the climate emergency, potential energy source shortages, well, they're not even potential anymore, are they? And the need to transition to new solutions for energy and power. We're recovering from the pandemic. We see rising inflation. We see a drift towards populism. We're increasingly becoming accustomed to change on multiple indices. And over the last 6 months, I suppose I really want to touch on the huge trauma that's been inflicted on the Ukrainian population and on many ordinary Russians. And it's made me personally pause to reflect practically every day on what I do and what I ought to be doing. I've got to continually reassess the validity and usefulness of the contribution I've been making, and I'm sure many of you have had similar reflections. But sort of, I suppose, sharing a little bit here with you, half of my family are originally from the Middle East, and so over the last 70 years, we've been completely dispersed from our homelands because of various wars and conflicts, and both of my grandmothers lost not only their homes and their possessions, but they lost their communities and they lost many friendships, and the cultures and the rituals that really had bound them together for generations was really torn apart. And although their experiences are not my experience, I know a little bit about the impact of war on families and how the loss of culture impacts you and those around you. But in thinking about not just this address, but all the different sorts of speeches I have to give or want to give, I concluded when all this sort of started that for my profession, our profession, what I'm going to talk about today really does matter. It isn't in the nice to have, because culture and the creative industries that are fashioned from our artistic heritage and our cultural experiences really define who we are and how we live and what we fight for. They reflect our collective values and they characterize us as nations and communities. And furthermore, we as professionals within the cultural and creative industries happen to have a whole raft of solutions towards many of those big geopolitical challenges that are literally racing down the track towards us. So, you know, we are the people who have been trained as designers and critical thinkers, as producers and communicators. My background is in filmmaking. I've exec produced probably about 100 films, maybe less so in the last 20 years, but you know, that's how I started out. And I'm sure each of you have got your own sort of skill sets that you bring. And we know how we can create something from nothing. We can fashion solutions with very little resource, and importantly, we know how to bring communities together through that sort of shared creative endeavour. So whilst I'm going to focus today on why it makes sense to support the creative industries as an economic driver of better prosperity, and how we might have some solutions to many of the global challenges that we're facing, I really want us to reflect on something that is just as important, which is that our culture and our creativity is what defines us, regardless of money. It's integral to our collective European DNA, it's integral to the functioning of our democracies, and it's integral to how we design our futures. So I thought I'd start by just outlining what I see as the biggest challenges we're facing in Europe, and there's a long list. So we have an increasingly ageing population and a rising pressure on health and care services, particularly since the pandemic. We need to move to new energy solutions to address the climate emergency. We see many jobs being displaced through automation and digital transformation. We've got rising levels of immigration and different refugee crises. We have internal state and interstate culture wars and real wars, and a drift towards populism. And it's clear that despite the fact we had I thought, quite an inspirational opening speech from Mr. Erler, and also from your own Czech minister as well, they are the exception rather the rule, aren't they? Because there generally tends to be a bit of an absence of understanding amongst many politicians, and I think candidly the broader public, of how culture and creative industries can contribute to solving some of these challenges. So where should we look for solutions? I don't have time today to go into that whole long list, but I thought I'd really sort of start with something that we all have in common, which is our health. So whilst we hope we've seen the back of COVID-19, we can't really be complacent about the fact that Europe has an ageing population. We've recently emerged from a seismic health crisis, and it was clear how much we valued and needed our arts and cultural sector to keep us sane. And to their credit, most leaders, I think, in the different countries understood that too, and they committed resources to helping artists, creators and creative companies through the pandemic. Our government, which is not an interventionist government at all, you know, in themselves committed over 2 billion to support the arts, which is the largest contribution they've ever made. But there is a larger contribution that can be made here by creative industries, and that is by keeping us healthy in the first place. So all the evidence points to people who are culturally engaged are less lonely, they're fitter, they're more cognitively engaged than those who aren't. And it's not just because of that entertainment function that's important. There are other contributions as well to health and well-being through social prescribing. Again, mounting evidence points to the transformative effect of treatments such as music therapy to reduce stress, improve mental health and cognitive functions, and hasten recovery from debilitating illnesses. My own my own doctor is a specialist who's been practicing social prescribing for over 20 years, and he's got longitudinal data that's able to show how his patients are getting better by being involved in art and craft classes rather than being on, for example, antidepressants or other things. So we know that participation in the arts promotes holistic wellness and can aid recovery. And there are many reports that demonstrate how including the arts in healthcare through social prescribing has real positive clinical outcomes for patients. But as ever, publishing the evidence is where we need to start if we want to change policy. Now, the European Regional Office for the World Health Organization published some research and evidence in 2019 about the role of the arts in improving health and well-being. And I thought I'd quote it here. They found that the use of artistic media in healthcare and in communities can have a variety of benefits for health outcomes. They can be used to communicate valuable messages across cultures and political divides, help affected communities understand the risks of certain diseases or behaviours, and provide ways for affected populations to process and learn from their individual and collective experience to improve their well-being, among other benefits. And they published a whole series of data that I would really urge you have a look at to sort of show, if you like, in both quantitative and qualitative ways, the impact of social prescribing. But despite that mounting evidence on the benefits of social prescribing, we do need to do more to create strong, more diverse intersectorial networks that are focused on a bigger, more holistic narrative to help the world through this time of uncertainty. And I think there's a real need to proactively reach out to different voices and convince medical educators and practitioners, leaders in international organisations, and policymakers with that data and those stories to overcome scepticism about the power of culture and creative communication in healing and promoting mental health. And I think we're very good at talking to each other in the cultural and creative sector. Perhaps, however, we would do much more good if we spent more time talking to doctors and to chemists and to physicists and to engineers. My contention is that politicians and policymakers also really underestimate and underappreciate the capacity of the people who are working in culture and the creative industries to communicate the complexity of all of those sorts of challenges, or even our ability to help the development of empathy and to nudge behaviour change. Because they forget that after all, what we are is a group of storytellers with a talent to both imagine and create shared narratives which build resilience and which regenerate the imagination and the soul. Because in the many conversations I've had in the last few years with business leaders from across many different sectors, so many of the people I talk to head up, Rolls-Royce or Unilever or, some of those really, really big multinationals. And what's really clear from talking to them is that they have an urgent need and a real appetite for creative practitioners. From rocket builders through to surgeons, the skills we have are not confined to our discrete sector needs. They have a massive role to play in European industrial and social policy, in our health and care systems, and in our future education approaches. I think we can categorize the power of culture in the creative industries to address global challenges in two ways. The first is through our ability to convene different and often competing ideas and communities to create a shared narrative. Because as you know, we're able to say two extraordinarily conflicting things and for both to be true at the same time. And I don't think there are many sectors that get away with that. And the second really is through our inbuilt practice of innovation and the design and creation of bespoke and original responses. And I want to perhaps dwell on that second characteristic, which many commentators and academics define as creative spillovers. I think there's less talked about creative spillovers these days, but I think that we're only really at the beginning of really understanding how these things work. And by that I mean the sort of process by which activity in the cultural and creative industries has a subsequent broader impact on innovation and other industrial sectors. And research by several academics over the last 10 years has really championed the growth of these things called fused skill sets, which is basically the coming together of creative skills with STEM-based skills. And by STEM, I mean, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And the emergence of these new fused occupations has been at the root of a host of new and emerging verticals in the creative industries. Augmented and virtual reality is probably the most well-known example, and AI is the next. And often led by developments in video games, we're seeing many other industrial sectors use these technologies that were originally designed to enhance the sort of immersion that you get in game playing. And they're now using that tech to power other types of hyperreality simulation technologies. So game engine technology is not just powering Fortnite, but it's also creating the next generation of jet engines, or it's training surgeons in complex procedures and teaching astronauts now how to navigate Mars. And we're not even going to start on the metaverse. We haven't got time for that. And what that is going to mean for the global economy. I don't know how many of you here are gamers or have children who have gamers, but I have a son in his early 20s who's already buying land in the metaverse. Hopefully he's using his own money for it. Over the years, gaming has created real sophisticated visualization abilities, which, whilst developing that technology that enables thousands of users to converge and play simultaneously. And together, these capabilities are beginning to solve issues faced by multiple industries. Companies involved in automotive and civil engineering are turning to game engines to help with product design, testing, prototyping, marketing, of course, and more. Manufacturers such as Audi are using game engines to simulate the design of new vehicles. And according to a recent report from Perforce Software, which is a market analysis company, 50% of respondents from the automotive industry expressed interest in using game engines in the coming months. Because the semiconductors in the Xbox and PlayStation can handle massive numbers of assets and 500-player teams, which enables manufacturers who adopt this technology to move so much more quickly to market. Previously, they would have needed years of product testing in real-world environments, but with gaming technology, you can reduce this testing considerably. So that ideas that would have taken years to develop and iterate can now be in the market in a third of the time. Civil engineering teams are using game engines to create digital twins of cities. So in China, Unreal Engine, which is the technology behind Fortnite, I'm sure you know that, is being used to create a digital twin of all of Shanghai's traffic, buildings and vehicles so that authorities can model traffic patterns. And this means that they can model what it might look like if they change those traffic changes. They can track the flow of traffic. They can look at how to design new water systems or new pedestrian systems. They can model scenarios and make far more informed decisions about future investment. And these applications not only result in the development of ongoing innovation, which has a real budgetary implications, but in the long run, I think it's going to mean that we can be kinder to our planet because we're going to waste less resources getting there. And I suppose that brings me to perhaps our biggest shared global challenge, which is the climate emergency. Now, over the last year, we've heard from many colleagues about how the cultural and creative industries can reduce its carbon footprint and play an important role in addressing climate change to meet net zero goals. We've seen groups come together within our sector to provide collective leadership, such as, for example, Architects Declare or Music Declares. And we've seen the rise of some seminal practitioners prototyping solutions as varied as self-cleaning fabrics, reducing water usage in the fashion industry, through to the development of new renewable and organic materials for fashion, furniture, architecture and product design. Artist, designer, technologist, architect, biologist and engineer Neri Oxman of MIT, I don't know how many people know her. If you don't, you need to Google her and find a way of making her your new best friend. She's one such example. She's a real Renaissance woman. And she's been leading groundbreaking work to find natural, non-harmful solutions to create new forms of building materials that will have zero impact on our planet by creating buildings from sustainable plant materials. She's literally creating the new concrete from mushrooms. However, she's also been looking at existential problems about what it means to be both alive and also live in a world that remains populated by the dead. She's been creating pigments from ancient death masks from Peru. To create new artworks, she's experimenting with how we can capture the life around us for those who've breathed the same air into an expression of what being alive is all about. And what's clear, I think, from somebody like Oxman, and I'm on obviously many other artists and design, you know, those fused people, if you like, what they understand is the role of culture to experiment and lead the way, to create those exemplars and templates that others can learn from. They bring an ability to bring together the useful, if you like, with the spiritual and the intrinsic. And I think we need to hold on to that and really squeeze the juice out of the power of arts and culture to communicate the complexity, not just of climate change and our solutions to these big global challenges, but how we can develop empathy and create behaviour change. I've often talked about the need to recognise culture as the research and development laboratory for the application of human endeavour. It's in that space where you start conceiving of how you create something from nothing, that humans are at their most distinctive from other creatures and obviously they're most powerful. We take our ability to imagine for granted, yet it's one of the most precious skill sets that we have. And it requires the same nurturing and investment that other competencies and aptitudes demand. I read an interesting phrase somewhere about culture needs to be pitched as infrastructure of the future. And I think that's incredibly poignant. Imagining the arts and our creativity as a language that can transcend the everyday to build new shared narratives and create those shared moments of connection and resilience. Because the great strength of storytelling is that it does transcend geography and politics to imagine shared solutions that are both regenerative and resilient. And the best stories, of course, are those that focus on a specific local experience, but in the telling you realise that the narrative is a global one, a story that starts with the small but which communicates universal truths. As a filmmaker, that was something I was always, acutely aware of. And we're increasingly aware of how interconnected we all are, as citizens, as consumers, as democrats, as communities. But we rarely think about how we nurture our ecosystems and how we support these connections and these intersections. Any gardener will tell you that for a seed to grow, it needs to be fed and watered and tended. You need to make sure that your plant isn't choked by weeds that are competing for the same resources. And often you might have to stake it to support its growth. And you need to be careful what you plant around it so that the garden works harmoniously through the seasons. And if you look at a forest, you can both see the individual trees and the collection that makes the forest. But what you don't see is that beneath each tree is an ecosystem feeding both the individual and the collective. Each tree is cooperating with its neighbours to share and ensure mutual survival and growth, feeding that soil, sharing nutrients and protecting the smaller plants from the most extreme elements. And the same is true for our creative ecosystem. It needs that nurturing. And with so much change at the door, we need to ensure we have the necessary resilience, cognitive and emotional, to withstand this continuously shifting set of circumstances. That's the real power of creativity. It builds our ability to have agency so that we can respond to change rather than be powerless in its wake. And our cultures are at the core of this resilience and at the core of our ecosystems. The pandemic showed us that when traditionally understood infrastructure, so that's power lines and pipelines and ports and autobahns and trading networks, when they all ground to a halt and they became irrelevant, really, we realized that culture is the true core infrastructure that holds every community together. And that is what kept us together as communities through our bleakest moments. The challenges of these recent years have further exacerbated, if you like, the systemic issues that many of us have been talking about for the last decade. And we really have to act now if we want to sustain and grow our ability to build that next generation of creative talent and the businesses that they build and the communities that they operate in. Not just for the good of the sector, but for the good of the people that we serve. And after all, that's what we are about. It is about service. We know that the key to a healthy natural environment is diversity. Monocultures and a lack of diversity almost inevitably lead to negative outcomes. And just like the natural environment, just like that forest, so is our creativity fed by a diversity of knowledge, of experience and perspective. Arts and technology drive each other. Theoretical knowledge and practical experience work together. Respect for cultural heritage and the courage to ignore the past and try something new. Both are necessary for harmonious, vibrant societies and productive economies. And that's why creativity flourishes in open societies. And in turn, culture and creativity underpins open societies. And that's why working in the creative economy is not a marginal or irrelevant activity today. It's really why it's at the heart of what's really, really important. Thank you very much.
So thank you for this very inspirational speech. I learned so much again, as always, when I listen to you. Especially my take is that I think that's a really good storytelling, that the creativity is the infrastructure of the future. And also your take on somehow the connection to the mythological realm, you know, about, you know, that we are somehow leprechauns, you know, going on the rainbow and finding the treasures. I think this is also a very good metaphor of building infrastructure with our imagination and finding then the gold at the end of the rainbow. So thank you very much for your speech. I mean, we will have then afterwards a little Q&A, but now we want to welcome our next speaker.